Here we have BrotherHobby's R5 2207 motor in 2400 and 2700 kV. This motor had been released for a couple of months already, and I hadn't had a chance to review it, and I was getting a lot of requests from people to test them and review them. So BrotherHobby went ahead and sent them to me for testing, so thanks BrotherHobby for sending it. I had a chance to test and review the R3 version of the 2207 in 2550 kV. So this motor review is on the channel, so I'm gonna link it there in the corner. So pretty good motor, performed quite well, and this one is as far as the BrotherHobby series, this is the R3, so it's one step below the R5. Still, it did quite well on the thrust test. So we'll go ahead and give a little bit of comparison between the two, see what the differences are, and of course, and then after you guys can check out the thrust test. Although this one is a different kV, it's 2550, so it's like in between these two. So you can't really compare them side by side. Because they're different kV, but still, you know, you can see what the motors make and make comparisons. So as usual, they come in this modest box, so it's better. Don't spend money on fancy boxes. And as usual, they give you the nylock, a set of screws. Looks like M3 by 8. So they both look exactly the same color scheme, same size. So the only difference is gonna be in the windings and the number of turns in in each of the windings. Otherwise, other than that, they look exactly the same. So as far as differences between this one and the R3, you can see they're using the same base. It's got a 16 by 19 mount hole pattern, and right away you can see the R3 uses a circlip for the 3mm shaft, and the R5 uses a retaining screw for the shaft, and what I think it's a 4mm shaft on this one, so a difference in shaft diameter. As far as the magnets and stator, as far as I can tell, they look pretty much the same. If anything, maybe the R5 has a little bit thicker magnets, but it's hard to tell without measuring. Almost the same. Really can't tell. And of course, the R5 has a titanium single piece shaft, and the R3 has an integrated shaft integrated into the bell. So that's the same material as the bell, aluminum 775 alloy. And as you can see, the armature is just about the same. The R5 is a little bit taller, and I imagine that's to have enough material there to allow for the shaft to be pressed in. So you got enough material for contact between the shaft and the aluminum, and of course, and the color scheme, of course. But other than that, they look pretty close to each other. Same pattern on the spokes, and they look pretty close. So let's see what the weight differences are. They both have very similar length of wires. I think this one is just slightly longer, so, but very slightly, just maybe 3 or 4 millimeters at most, I think. So let's see what the R3 weighs. And that's 33.1. and the R5 32.1. So about a gram difference between the two. So that's thanks to the titanium shaft. Probably most of the weight savings is from the shaft itself. Alright, so let's get a weight on the motor with the equivalent 50 millimeters of wire, so that you'd cut that much wire. So let's tare that at 2.4 grams, and with 50 millimeters of wire, the motor is going to be 29.6. So very lightweight motor, excellent weight for a 2207, thanks to all the weight savings features, titanium shaft, and the naked bottom style of the motor. So pretty nice and light. Alright, so I'm gonna remove the retaining shaft, and I've already heated up for a little bit because it was kind of tight. Sometimes they use this white Loctite that is very hard to break the screws loose. So you want to make sure to use a good hex key, because otherwise you end up rounding the heads of the screws, and then it's gonna be really hard to remove. So I applied a little bit of heat. Always, if you're using the soldering iron, make sure it's not overheating too much. After 3 minutes, I kind of touch the bell, make sure it's not too hot. But this white Loctite, sometimes even the heat doesn't loosen it. So what you do is you gotta press down and turn. There it goes. So good thing it didn't get stuck. And that's gonna be a fully hollow shaft, I think. And there it goes. It's hollow all the way through, so that's good. Okay, so once the screw's out, let's remove the bell. And the bearing popped out, so that's actually kind of good. It's easy to remove. So let's have a chance to look at the bearing. That's looks like a 4x8x3. So yes, 4 ID and 8 millimeters on the OD and 3 millimeters width. So that's the bearing. Alright, so here's the stator without the bearing. You can see inside the bearing housing. Of course, as usual with BrotherHobby motors, impeccable windings, single strand wire. And there's the bearing, so that should pop right in, fits nice and tight, and looks like 0.15 millimeter laminations. So let's let's measure the height of the stator. 7 millimeters, so right on spec. Nice and thick base. And wires, stator wires are nicely tucked in, so nothing coming out of there, so that's good. And here's the bell assembly, 4 millimeter titanium shaft, fully hollow, and the arc magnets. So overall, as usual with BrotherHobby, very nicely constructed motors. And these have already been reviewed by a lot of the other popular channels, and they always get very good comments. They always talk about how smooth and responsive these are, so we all know that these perform outstandingly. So alright, put the screw back on, and we'll get them on the thrust stand and see where they stack up against the other 2207's. Alright, so here are the thrust test results for the BrotherHobby R5 2207 2400 kV. As you saw, the motor measured at 2480 kV as measured by the thrust stand. So pretty close to the 2400 spec. A little bit higher, so that's not too bad. And based on that kV, I was able to test it on 3S, 4S, and 5S. So the usual props, 5-inch all the way to 6-inch props for these motors. So let's look at the numbers here. With the Gen Fan 5045BN, pretty good number here, 1400 grams at very manageable 36 amps. Again, you have to remember to multiply this times 0.65 or around 0.6 to get you what the expected maximum burst amps are going to be in flight. So don't let these high numbers fool you. This is exaggerated because of the static conditions. You know, motors are loaded far more under static conditions than once you get them in the air with moving air through the blades. The propellers unload, so they'll be able to spin faster without grabbing as much air as when they're standing. So that's why in the air we see lower amps. And getting back to the numbers here, looking at the 5.5-inch prop, which I included here just to see what the difference between these two would be. Pretty interesting to see the BN variant of the 5.5-inch prop from HQ perform actually better than the standard 5545, which is a prop designed to be a 5.5-inch prop. So 1655 versus 1507, and for practically the same amount of amps, and you're getting better performance. And I believe this one's derived from the 6045. It just has the tips cut off. I guess because of the shape of the 6045, cutting off basically 1/4 of an inch out of each tip, it doesn't create a turbulent air, you know. So that's why this one performs pretty well, I think. So the blunt nose area is actually quite small, so that's why I think it performs quite well. Then moving on to the 5S test with the HQ 5043x3, 1915 grams, so that's quite impressive at also very manageable 50.2 amps. So here's the advantage of using high voltage with this KV, kind of like a medium speed KV. Pretty good match, I think. And of course, this motor is also going to be able to drive a lot of these props on 5S. Once unloaded, the motor should be able to handle a couple of these other more aggressive props. But on the thrust stand, the amps just go way too high. That's why I don't really want to test 5S with these more aggressive props. What ends up happening is you end up overheating and getting some bits of smoke out of the windings. But I think the motor should be able to handle these more aggressive 5-inch props. Approaching 1500 here with the 4-blade prop, and then going past 1500 grams with the DAL and the DYS 5045 props. So pretty good match for those props. And then onto the 6-inch blades. Very impressive numbers here at 1800 grams and quite manageable amps. So this motor matches pretty well with 6-inch props. I don't know if anybody's flying 6-inch with these motors, but there's the numbers. And that's quite interesting to see these figures here. If you compare it to the 2700 kV motor, it's actually very close to the 2700 kV numbers, but at much lower amps. So that just kind of shows you how these larger props match better with the lower kV. So it's kind of interesting to see. So okay, those were the thrust results for this motor. Hope you find that useful, and thank you for watching as always.